All right, I want you to listen to something because I'm confused. Listen to this.
Our objective is clear, and that is to degrade and destroy ISIL so that it's no longer a threat, not just to Iraq, but also to the region and to the United States.
Okay, all well and good. Then, later in the same speech, this.
We can continue to shrink ISIL's sphere of influence, its effectiveness, its financing, its military capabilities, to the point where it is a manageable problem.
Destroy or debate a manageable problem. Maybe that is the problem. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and Fox on top of the very latest effort to keep these killers contained. To former Cold Commander Kirk Liffold, who says you don't manage terror groups, the president might have been wise to stick with his opening remarks and try to focus on annihilating them. Commander, what do you make of the mixed message, though? Because on the one hand, he says, you know, we're going to get really in their face and deal with this. On the other, we're not going to go that far. What do you say?
I think, Neil, what you're seeing is that we, in fact, do not have a comprehensive U.S. government strategy for how we're going to deal with ISIS, either at the National Security Council level or at the military level. Even though you had Admiral Kirby as the Pentagon spokesman the other day say they're ready, how can they really articulate whether or not the military's ready if the strategy hasn't defined goals to achieve national security objectives or military objectives? And that's why I think you're seeing the confused messages even with President Biden or Vice President Biden today. It's another confusing message from the administration.
We should stress that the vice president was saying very fiery remarks, and of all places, I think it was Portsmouth, New Hampshire, insisting that, you know, we're going to send ISIS back to the fiery gates of hell. So obviously he's much more in your face, much more dramatic, maybe with an eye toward the future or abandoning his boss now. What do you think?
Well, there's certainly a political component to anything that Vice President Biden is going to say. He's not just going to cede that nomination for the presidency to Hillary Clinton and walk away from it. So I think that there may have been a political component there, but he's also a man that speaks from his heart a lot of times. While he may stumble on his words, you know for sure he's passionate about it, and I think he was very passionate today in saying that we need to go after these guys, and we will follow them to the gates of hell if necessary to destroy them.
But when, you know, the gates of hell remark and everything else involves, you know, a big effort, a wider effort than we're using right now to deal with ISIS. That involves going into Syria with or without our allies. The president apparently making clear that he wants something based on a coalition support, and he seems to be measuring what has been a tentative American response for getting involved in the Middle East in any way, shape, or form in a big way again. Has the developments at ISIS, and particularly the beheadings of these American journalists over the last couple of weeks, changed that?
Absolutely. What you've seen now is they have gone from threats to actually harming and brutally slaughtering Americans. That deserves to have a very cold, calculated response with very clear objectives on what we are going to do. The president saying he is not going to put boots on the ground, I think at this point that has to be an option that we put on the table. While the American people
wait a minute, Commander. I'm sorry. When you say boots on the ground has to be an option put on the table, are you saying boots on the ground in Syria, more boots than we've got than the 350 additional troops in Iraq? What?
I think Neil, what we're really going to have to look at is the president, through the National Security Council, is going to have to define what the strategy is going to be to initially contain ISIS and then destroy ISIS. And they're not going to be able to do it solely with air power, striking a few bombs, taking out a few vehicles. We have to look at a comprehensive program that we are going to use to safeguard our nation and its citizens. We need to make sure that we take away that capability. I mean, I spoke on Monday and said, look, there's a money component to this, but essentially ISIS is becoming a small government. They are well funded. They have billions of dollars. They have assets. They have military capability. And they're beginning to take over more and more territory, consolidate what they're doing, and be able to strike not just regionally in Syria and Iraq, but beyond that. Clearly, Great Britain understands that threat. I'm not sure that we really comprehend that threat yet, but I don't want the American people to be in danger here at home. And the president needs to look at how we can project power, and every option at this point with Americans dying must be on the table. And if that includes a robust response that involves military forces on the ground, it must be considered.
Commander, thank you very much. Speaking of which, forget about containing them or killing them over there. Is ISIS already here and ready to strike here? Former CIA bigwig Brian Fairchild says the threat is real. How real do you think?
Well, Neil, I think it's very real. I think that the intelligence, you have to go by what the intelligence indicates. The intelligence indicates that ISIS is a sophisticated military operation. They specialize in big operations and complex operations. They have $2 billion in assets, a great management capability. They have a lock on the foreign fighters traveling to Iraq and Syria. These suicide bombers, I mean, these foreign fighters conduct about 30 to 50 suicide bombings a month in the area. So there's plenty of people going around that have the desire to give their all for their cause. In addition to that, Neil, I think one of the biggest problems is that ISIS presents an actual threat to the ideology and the heart of the Islamic Jihad movement. They threaten Ayman al-Zawahiri and core al-Qaeda. Now we've got the 9/11 attack anniversary coming up, and Zawahiri is kind of slipping into irrelevance. In order for him to stay relevant to the jihad movement, it would be in his interest to attack us here back in the homeland. But at the same time,
are you saying attack us back in the homeland pegged to that anniversary of 9/11? Close to that anniversary here, Europe, where?
No, I'm thinking that, you know, here, I can't say that they will attack on 9/11, but it certainly would be a coup if Zawahiri, who's slipping into irrelevance, could revisit an attack on the United States on the same anniversary of the attack that he created in 9/11. Al-Baghdadi himself is already a rock star as far as the international jihad movement is concerned. If he conducted an attack, and if that attack coincided with the 13th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, then that would catapult him beyond, you know, beyond catch-up for Zawahiri. Neil, another problem is that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who's already attacked us with the underwear bomber, with 2 attacks, with the explosives in the cartridges, the ink cartridges and copy machines. These guys also have a new explosives compound that can't be detected by our sensors. They recently pledged solidarity with ISIS after we conducted airstrikes on ISIS. So we've got threat streams that are coming in from core al-Qaeda and Ayman al-Zawahiri. We got threat streams coming in from al-Baghdadi and ISIS. And we've got al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula not only pledging solidarity, Neil, but also saying, because the Americans have attacked you, we will launch mass casualty attacks against them. Now, they didn't say in the United States, but if you follow the intelligence, you have to consider that that would be a major coup.
They've made it clear beyond just their neck of the woods. Brian Fairchild, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, here's how bad this ISIS threat is getting. Even the mainstream media is panicking. And when it comes to this president, scorching. The New York Daily News today asking, do you have a strategy now, Mr. President? Right on its front page. And an op-ed in no less than the Washington Post focusing on what it calls the president's unnerving happy talk. Pat Buchanan now has advised 3 U.S. presidents, Nixon, Ford, and Reagan. What does he make of this one and his handling of this crisis? Patrick, what do you think?
How are you, Neil? I think what we just heard was pretty important. Look, this is a barbaric atrocity committed against Americans, but at the same time, ISIS has gotten pretty much what it wants in terms of the extraordinary publicity they've received in this country. We're talking about them as the existential threat to America. And even al-Qaeda, and my guess is these other Sunni radicals are probably rallying to their flag right now. But I do think that the solution to this lies in 2 separate parts. In Iraq, I think we should support the Iraqis and the Kurds with air power. In Syria, I do not believe we should have any boots on the ground in Syria. I believe what we should do there is talk to Assad and, quite frankly, work with him and get permission to use airstrikes to strike these people and pay them back.
You think Assad would do that? I mean, it was a year ago, this time of year, that the president was looking at airstrikes within Syria to take out Assad. Now, he shelved that for favor of getting support in Congress to do that, never got that far. But now, ironically, he would go back to Assad to seek his permission to go and attack ISIS positions?
Let me say this. I think that the last year, the people calling for attacks on Assad were not thinking. One of two or three forces is going to control Damascus: ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or Assad. Now, which would you prefer? None of us likes Assad, but he's never been a threat to the United States. And if you can work with him and even some other unsavory characters and go after ISIS, if ISIS is the main threat to the United States, that's what you ought to do.
Well, you know, there are many who will dispute that and say we never know who's on first or who's really our friend. And the case of the Egypt uprising. But I only raise this, that's why Americans are leery of protracted entanglements, because just this sort of who's on first, who's our friend, who do we support, who's the least of all the evils comes up.
Here's what we ought not to do. Do not send another American army into Iraq, and do not send an American army into Syria.
So no boots on the ground. Pat Buchanan says no boots on the ground.
The Syrians, the Turks, the Iraqis, the Kurds have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. There's about 16,000 in ISIS. They can deal with the boots on the ground, and the Americans can provide air power. But to send Americans in there, Neil, this is why Al-Qaeda is all over the world today. They hit us on 9/11. We go crashing into Afghanistan, try to rebuild it. We go crashing into Iraq. We go crashing into Syria.
No, I know what you're saying, but are you afraid that what happens is, let's say we increase the airstrikes, you know, you're damned you do, damned you don't, and all of a sudden these nuts start saying, well, see, the Americans are upping the airstrikes and targeting us. We told you this would happen. We continue with the beheadings. You unite a lot of these crazies into one group that forms this great caliphate, and we actually breed more of the same problem we're trying to eradicate.
There is no caliphate that can threaten the United States. A caliphate is a state. We are threatened by individual terrorists. What we ought to do, this is going to be a long war, Neil. What you ought to do is systematically work with all the players in the region, almost all of whom despise this group. Work with them. They provide the troops, as they did at Mount Sinjar, as they did in Maryland, and provide the air power with them and systematically degrade and attack these people until they are finished.
Well, do you think, let's say the president does that, because he's been criticized for this management problem remark, to paraphrase earlier today, and that I guess we can't eradicate them, so at best we try to contain them. Do you think if that strategy of yours was offered up by this president to Congress, you know, an extended air campaign, no boots on the ground, that Congress would support that and let him do that?
I think Congress would support that if the president said, I'm going to use American air power. We're not going to have boots on the ground in Iraq in any numbers. We're not sending any army into Syria, but I want your support for airstrikes, I think, and to aid and deal with anyone who will help us in this fight.
Okay.
I think he would get an okay.
All right, we'll see about that. Last year, different story. Pat Buchanan, a former presidential candidate, best-selling author. All right, well, Britain already has raised its security threat, and that was before ISIS lined up a Brit as its next potential victim. So think the British are slowing down? More like doubling down. I'll explain.